April 11th, 1951. Washington, D.C., 6 o'clock in the morning. A news bulletin spreads across radio stations that shakes all of America to its core. President Harry Truman has fired America's most powerful and popular general, Douglas MacArthur. People couldn't believe it. Some said it was fake news. Others called it communist propaganda. But it was real. And behind this single decision lies a story that took us to the doorstep of nuclear war and World War III. Today, I'm taking you back to a moment in time, when a president risked his entire political career to save democracy itself. This is a story about courage, about power, about ego, and most importantly, about a mistake that Truman refused to repeat. So let's begin from the very beginning. General Douglas MacArthur. When Americans heard that name, from children to the elderly, everyone thought of one thing: victory, glory, power. MacArthur wasn't just any ordinary general. He was a living legend. In World War I, when he was only 38 years old, he became the most decorated American soldier. People said back then, "This man knows no fear." Then came World War II. Japan attacked Pearl Harbor. America entered the war, and MacArthur was sent to the Pacific Theater. He made history. He liberated the Philippines. He created the island-hopping strategy. And when Japan surrendered, MacArthur was made the Supreme Commander of Japan. Yes, you heard that right. An American general reconstructing Japan, writing their constitution, establishing democracy. The Japanese began calling MacArthur Gaijin Shogun, the foreign emperor. But this power, this adulation, this unlimited authority. It planted a dangerous idea. In MacArthur's mind, he began to think, I'm not just a general. I'm making history. I'm controlling destiny. In 1948, when the Republican presidential primaries came around, MacArthur's supporters wanted him to run for president. He didn't win, but something took root in his heart. I am greater than presidents. And then, in 1950, the Korean War began. June 25, 1950. North Korean forces, backed by Soviet tanks, crossed the 38th parallel and invaded South Korea. This wasn't just a regional conflict. The Cold War was at its peak. The Soviet Union had developed nuclear weapons. China had become communist. America feared, if Korea falls, communism will spread across all of Asia. President Truman faced a difficult decision. Truman was a simple man from Missouri, a shopkeeper's son, a World War I veteran. He was vice president when Roosevelt suddenly died. He wasn't some grand military leader, but he understood the Constitution. He knew, in America, civilian control is supreme. The president is commander-in-chief, but he also knew he needed a general who could win in Korea. And who was the most famous general? Douglas MacArthur. So Truman made MacArthur the commander of UN forces. And he said, "General, go. Save South Korea, but don't provoke China." MacArthur smiled. "Yes, Mr. President." But in his heart, he thought, "Don't let these politicians teach me how to fight wars." The first month went badly. North Korean forces were fast. They pushed South Korean and American forces into a corner near Busan. Newspaper headlines, "Are we losing Korea?" But then, MacArthur played his masterstroke. September 15, 1950. The Incheon landing. It was an impossible plan. The tides at Inchinport were extremely dangerous. No general wanted to attempt a landing there, but MacArthur said, "Nothing is impossible." And he was right. American Marines landed at Inchin. They cut North Korean supply lines. And then the counterattack began. Within a month, North Korean forces were in retreat. MacArthur became a hero. Newspapers proclaimed, "MacArthur the genius. The great general does it again." Truman was pleased too. He congratulated MacArthur. This very success became poison for MacArthur. Because when people started saying, "MacArthur is never wrong," MacArthur began believing it himself. October 1950. South Korea was now free. Mission accomplished. But MacArthur didn't stop. He said, "Why should we just defend? We can liberate North Korea too." The UN gave permission. American forces crossed the 38th parallel and entered North Korea. But Truman had a growing fear in his heart. He called MacArthur to Wake Island. October 15th. This is a famous meeting. Black and white photographs still exist today. Truman asked, "General, if we go into North Korea, what about China? Will they enter the war?" MacArthur laughed and said, "Mr. President, absolutely not. The Chinese are scared. They won't intervene. And even if they do, we'll destroy them." Truman felt uncomfortable, but he trusted MacArthur. A mistake. A big mistake, because China was already moving. Mao Zedong declared, "If the Americans come to our border, we will fight." By the end of October, Chinese forces began secretly entering North Korea, first a few thousand, then tens of thousands, then hundreds of thousands. American intelligence received some information. They informed Truman. Truman sent another message to MacArthur. "General, be careful. We're getting reports of Chinese troops." MacArthur's response? "That's propaganda. The Chinese don't have the courage to come." And he kept pushing his troops forward all the way to the Yalu River, to China's border. November 25, 1950, Thanksgiving Day. American soldiers were thinking, "We'll be home by Christmas. The war is over." MacArthur told reporters, "The boys will be home by Christmas." 300,000 Chinese soldiers attacked from every direction. From all sides. American forces. Surrounded. This was America's greatest disaster in the Korean War. Historians call it the Big Bug Out. Thousands of American soldiers were killed. Thousands were captured. And worst of all. MacArthur's single quotes as arrogance was exposed. He was wrong. Completely wrong. But. He didn't admit it. December 1950, January 1951. War had completely changed. This wasn't just North Korea versus South Korea anymore. This was America versus China, and Chinese forces pushed American forces back into South Korea. Seoul was captured again. American public was shocked. What's happening? Are we losing? The pressure was immense. And MacArthur had a solution, a terrifying solution. He sent Truman a series of proposals. Proposal 1. Let me bomb mainland China. We'll target Manchuria, where Chinese supplies are coming from. Proposal 2. We'll use Taiwan's nationalist Chinese forces. Let them attack China. Proposal 3. And this was the most dangerous. Give me 30 to 50 atomic bombs. I'll use them on the China-Korea border. I'll create a radioactive belt that no Chinese soldier can cross. When Truman read these proposals, his hands trembled. Atomic bombs? Direct attack on China? What would this mean? World War III. The Soviet Union had an alliance with China. If America attacked China, the Soviets would enter the war. War in Europe. War in Asia. Nuclear weapons everywhere. Truman had seen World War II. He'd seen Hiroshima. He'd seen Nagasaki. He knew what nuclear war meant. Millions would die. Cities would be destroyed. Civilization could end. And all of this. For Korea? No. Truman sent a clear message. General, you will not attack China. You will not use nuclear weapons. This is a limited war and it will remain limited. But MacArthur wouldn't listen. He even started speaking publicly, giving interviews to newspapers, talking to congressmen. Truman is weak. He's scared of communists. We can win if you just let me act. Republicans, who were opponents of Truman's Democratic Party, began supporting MacArthur. Senator Joseph McCarthy declared, "Truman is a communist sympathizer." The pressure was enormous. But Truman didn't budge because something else was running through his mind. Franklin Roosevelt's mistake. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, America's most popular president. Won 4 terms. Handled the Great Depression. Won World War II, but he made one mistake. During World War II, Roosevelt gave his generals too much power. Eisenhower, Patton, MacArthur, all of them. He would say, "I'll handle civilian matters. You fight the war. Sounds reasonable, right?" But the problem was the generals gained so much power, they began challenging civilian control. MacArthur had ignored Roosevelt's orders during World War II as well. Patton had also made decisions on his own. And Roosevelt couldn't control them because he was physically weak, paralyzed by polio. By the end of the war, the military had gained so much power that the president had become just a rubber stamp for important military decisions. Truman had witnessed all of this. He was Roosevelt's vice president, and when he became president himself, he made a promise. "I will restore civilian control." The Constitution says the president is commander-in-chief, not any general. But MacArthur was ignoring the Constitution. He was openly contradicting the president's policies. He was interfering in foreign policy. This wasn't just insubordination. This was a danger to democracy itself. Truman's advisors told him, "Mr. President, if you can't stop MacArthur, how are you the president? If a general can decide to start a nuclear war, what's the point of voting? If the military can ignore civilian government, we'll become a military dictatorship." Truman stayed awake all night. He thought about his father, a simple farmer, who used to say, "Son, democracy is the most important thing." He thought about the Constitution, which he had sworn an oath to protect when he became president. He thought about future generations. If I lose today, tomorrow another general will challenge the president. A decision had to be made, the most difficult decision. March 1951. Truman made one last attempt. He wanted to start peace talks with China and North Korea. "We'll negotiate. End the war. Too many people have died." Truman prepared a draft statement, a peace offer, but MacArthur found out, and he sabotaged it. On March 24th, MacArthur issued his own statement, publicly, in the newspapers. He said, "China should know they're losing the war. They should surrender unconditionally. Otherwise, we'll attack them on the mainland." This was a direct threat. This was the opposite of the president's foreign policy. This bordered on treason. But MacArthur didn't stop. On April 5th, Republican Congressman Joe Martin made public a letter from MacArthur. In that letter, MacArthur had written, "We're losing the war in Asia because politicians' hands are tied. If we want to win, we must use full force. We must destroy communism. Asia is more important than Europe. Here we fight or we lose everything." This was a direct attack on Truman's policy. This was undermining the president. And most importantly, this was a violation of the Constitution. April 10th, 9 p.m. The White House. Emergency meeting. Truman. Secretary of State Dean Acheson, Secretary of Defense George Marshall, and the Joint Chiefs of Staff. Marshall, himself a legendary general from World War II, said, "Mr. President, MacArthur has crossed the line. He's rejecting civilian control. If you don't take action, the Constitution is in danger." The Joint Chiefs agreed. Truman asked, "What will the public reaction be?" Acheson said, "Very bad. People love MacArthur. Your approval rating will drop. You might lose the next election." Truman remained silent for a few minutes. Then he said, "Gentlemen, I didn't become president to win elections. I became president to protect the Constitution. MacArthur must be fired." 11 p.m. Truman picked up his pen. He signed an order. "General of the Army Douglas MacArthur is hereby relieved of his commands." 6 m. April 11, 1951. Radio. Announcement. President Truman has fired General MacArthur. America. Was stunned. When MacArthur returned to America. It was a hero's return. 50000. People welcomed him in San Francisco. In New York, 7 million people flooded the streets. It was the largest ticker tape parade up to that time. On April 19th, MacArthur gave a speech to Congress. It became one of America's most famous speeches. He spoke his famous line, "Old soldiers never die. They just fade away." People had tears in their eyes, but Truman stood quietly in the White House. His approval rating crashed down to 22%. Newspapers wrote, "Worst president ever." Republicans demanded, "Impeach Truman." When elections came in 1952, Truman didn't even run again. He knew he would lose. But years passed. The Korean War ended in armistice in 1953. No nuclear war happened. The 1960s, 70s, 80s arrived. Historians researched. Documents were declassified, and the truth emerged. MacArthur was wrong. Dropping nuclear bombs on China would have started World War III. Letting Taiwan attack China would have brought the Soviet Union into the war. MacArthur's overconfidence cost thousands of American soldiers their lives. And Truman was right. He saved civilian control. He protected democracy. He prevented nuclear war. Today, historians consider Truman one of America's great presidents, and MacArthur a great general, but one who didn't understand his limitations. This story isn't just about a firing. This is a story about courage. When the whole world is against you, yet you still do what's right. This is a story about wisdom. When fighting a war seems easy, but choosing peace is truly brave. This is a story about sacrifice. When you let your career be destroyed to save democracy. Roosevelt's mistake. Truman refused to repeat. And that's why today. America is a democracy. That's why today. The military is under civilian control. That's why today ... The president has the power to use nuclear weapons. Not any general. On April 11, 1951, Harry Truman changed history ... and perhaps he saved the world from World War III. Asterisk.